What is enlightenment? The Buddha's discovery explained. Why do human beings suffer? Why, despite wealth, progress, and knowledge, do people still feel anxiety, emptiness, and despair? These were the same burning questions that drove a young prince named Siddhartha Gautama to leave his palace 2,500 years ago in search of truth. His discovery, in what came to be called enlightenment, was not a mystical escape from reality, but a radical, practical insight into the human condition and a path to freedom. Today, in a world drowning in stress, consumerism, and endless distractions, the Buddha's discovery remains as urgent as ever. We chase pleasure, but find disappointment. We cling to identities, but feel insecure. We run from suffering, but it follows us everywhere. Enlightenment, far from being an ancient myth, offers a solution to the problems of modern humanity: clarity in the midst of confusion, peace in the midst of chaos, and freedom in the midst of craving. Enlightenment is not about becoming something more. It is about seeing clearly what we already are. It is the Buddha's timeless gift, not a dogma, not a promise of another world, but a direct path to freedom here and now. The Buddha's journey to enlightenment. Siddhartha's privileged youth and the four sights. The story begins in the 6th century BCE in northern India, in a small kingdom at the foothills of the Himalayas. Siddhartha Gautama was born into luxury as the son of King Shuddhodana and Queen Maya of the Shakya clan. According to legend, his birth was accompanied by auspicious signs. The earth shook, heavenly music played, and wise men foretold that this child would grow into either a great king who would unite India or a great spiritual teacher who would renounce worldly life. His father, desiring the first outcome, shielded Siddhartha from every hardship. The young prince grew up in palaces filled with music, dancers, gardens, and endless comforts. He was educated in philosophy, trained in martial arts, and prepared for a life of rulership. He married the beautiful Princess Yasodhara, and together they had a son named Rahula. From the outside, Siddhartha's life looked perfect: wealth, youth, health, and power. But perfection built on denial is fragile. King Shuddhodana worked tirelessly to keep his son from encountering the realities of sickness, aging, or death. Yet life cannot be hidden forever. On excursions outside the palace, Siddhartha encountered what Buddhist tradition calls the four sights. First, he saw an old man, frail and bent, with wrinkled skin and failing strength. He asked his charioteer, "What is this?" The answer stunned him. "This is aging. All who live grow old." Next, he saw a sick person, suffering in pain. Again he asked, "What is this?" The reply, "This is illness. All beings are subject to disease." Third, he saw a corpse carried to cremation. Death, the unavoidable end of all who are born. These three sights shattered his protected worldview. Wealth and pleasure could not prevent aging, sickness, or death. The very foundations of worldly happiness seemed fragile, temporary, and ultimately doomed. Then came the fourth sight, a wandering ascetic, serene and detached, seeking truth beyond the fleeting pleasures of the world. In that moment, Siddhartha glimpsed another possibility, a life dedicated to finding a solution to suffering, his crisis with luxury, mortality, and meaninglessness. After the four sights, Siddhartha's inner crisis deepened. He returned to the palace, but the luxuries that once delighted him now seemed hollow. The music of the dancers reminded him of impermanence. The laughter of his companions felt empty against the inevitability of death. Even the love for his wife and child, though genuine, seemed tinged with sorrow. He realized they too were subject to sickness, aging, and death. This was not despair for himself alone. Siddhartha was haunted by the universal plight of humanity. Kings and peasants, rich and poor, all shared the same fate: suffering and mortality. Was life simply a cycle of fleeting pleasures, ending in inevitable decay? Was there no deeper meaning, no lasting peace? The dissonance grew unbearable. His comfortable life now felt like a prison, a gilded cage. The question pressed on his mind with relentless force: is there a way to end suffering? The great renunciation, leaving the palace. One night, Siddhartha made his decision. Legend tells that he looked upon his sleeping wife and child, torn between love and duty to truth. With compassion, he resolved to leave not out of rejection, but out of the hope of discovering a path that could free them and all beings were from suffering. He quietly left the palace, exchanged his princely robes for a beggar's simple garment, and renounced his title, his wealth, and his family. This act, known as the Great Renunciation, marks one of the most radical moments in religious history, a prince walking away from power and privilege in pursuit of truth. For 6 years, Siddhartha wandered as a seeker, learning from the leading spiritual teachers of his time. He mastered techniques of deep meditation and states of trance, but he remained unsatisfied. These methods offered temporary escape, but not permanent liberation. Years of asceticism and why they failed. Believing that suffering might be overcome through extreme self-denial, Siddhartha joined a group of ascetics who practiced severe austerities. He ate so little that his body wasted away. His skin clung to his bones, his hair fell out, and he nearly died of starvation. He meditated for long hours in pain, denying every bodily desire, convinced that this would lead to enlightenment. But one day, as he fainted from weakness, a realization dawned. Tormenting the body was no more a path to liberation than indulging it. Both extremes, luxury and self-mortification, were traps. Neither revealed the truth. A young village girl named Sujata offered him a bowl of milk rice. Accepting it, he regained his strength. His fellow ascetics, shocked, abandoned him, believing he had given up the quest. But Siddhartha understood something profound. The path to awakening lay not in extremes, but in balance. This insight became known as the middle way, avoiding both indulgence and asceticism, walking a path of moderation and mindful discipline. Meditation under the Bodhi tree, the night of awakening. Strengthened and clear, Siddhartha sat beneath a fig tree in Bodh Gaya, vowing not to rise until he attained the truth. For days and nights, he meditated deeply, facing the full reality of his mind. According to tradition, he was challenged by Mara, the embodiment of delusion and desire. Mara tempted him with visions of wealth, power, and sensual pleasures. When that failed, Mara threatened him with armies of demons and storms of fear. Finally, Mara questioned his right to awaken, demanding a witness. Siddhartha touched the earth with his right hand, and the earth itself bore witness to his resolve. Through the long night, Siddhartha's meditation penetrated the deepest layers of existence. In the first watch of the night, he recalled countless past lives. In the second, he saw the endless cycle of birth and death, the law of karma shaping all beings. In the third, he saw the Four Noble Truths, the nature of suffering, its causes, its cessation, and the path leading to freedom. As dawn broke, Siddhartha attained nirvana, complete liberation from craving, ignorance, and the cycle of rebirth. He was no longer Siddhartha the seeker, but the Buddha, the awakened one. The Buddha's first teaching and the radical new path. After enlightenment, the Buddha spent weeks in silence, contemplating the profound truth he had realized. Was it too subtle, too difficult for others to understand? Yet out of compassion, he resolved to share it. He journeyed to Sarnath, where his former companions were living. There in the deer park, he delivered his first sermon, the Dhammacakkappavattana Sutta, or Turning the Wheel of Dharma. In it, he laid out the Four Noble Truths. Life involves dukkha, suffering, unsatisfactoriness. The cause of suffering is craving and attachment. The cessation of suffering, nirvana, is possible. The path to cessation is the Noble Eightfold Path: right view, right intention, right speech, right action, right livelihood, right effort, right mindfulness, right concentration. This teaching was revolutionary. It rejected both blind ritualism and nihilistic despair. It did not depend on a creator God, nor did it promise salvation in another world. Instead, it offered a practical, experiential path to freedom here and now. The 5 ascetics who had once abandoned him became his first disciples, forming the nucleus of the Sangha, the community of practitioners. From that moment, the Buddha's teaching began to spread, changing the course of history. Tradition. What enlightenment means, the core teachings. When Siddhartha Gautama sat beneath the Bodhi tree and awakened, what exactly did he discover? What was the nature of this enlightenment that transformed a sheltered prince into the Buddha, one of history's greatest teachers of truth? To understand this, we must look not at myth or speculation, but at the core teachings he shared immediately after his awakening. These teachings are neither abstract theology nor blind belief. They are a practical framework for understanding the human condition and a path for liberation. The Four Noble Truths as the framework of awakening. The Buddha's enlightenment was articulated through the Four Noble Truths, which serve as the foundation of all Buddhist philosophy and practice. They are not commandments or dogmas, but observations about life and its possibilities. The truth of dukkha. Life involves suffering, unsatisfactoriness, or discontent. The truth of the cause of dukkha. The root of suffering is craving, clinging, and ignorance. The truth of the cessation of dukkha. It is possible to end suffering to attain nirvana. The truth of the path. The way to cessation is the Noble Eightfold Path, a life of ethical conduct, meditation, and wisdom. This framework is revolutionary in its clarity. It begins not with metaphysics, but with the undeniable reality of suffering. It diagnoses its cause, points to the possibility of healing, and prescribes a path of practice. It is almost medical in structure: diagnosis, cause, cure, and treatment. By framing enlightenment in these terms, the Buddha shifted the focus of religion away from divine beings, rituals, and speculative theories, and toward the practical transformation of human life. He offered not a belief system, but a therapy for the human condition. Dukkha, suffering, what it really means. At first glance, the Buddha's first truth, life is suffering, can sound pessimistic. But the word dukkha is richer and more nuanced than mere pain. It encompasses suffering, dissatisfaction, frustration, and the deep sense that life never quite fulfills us. Dukkha manifests in obvious ways: physical pain, illness, aging, death, grief, loss. But it also appears subtly: the anxiety of change, the boredom that follows pleasure, the nagging sense that even when life goes well, something is still missing. Imagine eating your favorite food. For a moment, there is delight, but soon the taste fades and you want more. If you overeat, pleasure turns into discomfort. If the food is unavailable tomorrow, craving brings disappointment. This cycle reveals the unsatisfactory nature of clinging to fleeting experiences. The Buddha was not denying joy, beauty, or love. He himself spoke of happiness, compassion, and serenity, but he pointed out that all conditioned experiences are impermanent. If we cling to them as the source of lasting fulfillment, they inevitably bring dukkha. This insight is not pessimistic but realistic. Just as a doctor begins with an honest assessment of illness, the Buddha began with truth. Life as ordinarily lived, bound by craving and ignorance, cannot provide ultimate satisfaction. Acknowledging this is the first step toward liberation. The cause of suffering: craving, clinging, ignorance. If suffering is the problem, what is its cause? The Buddha identified it as tanha, craving or thirst. We crave pleasures, possessions, status, security, existence, even non-existence. We cling to ideas, identities, relationships, and outcomes. This clinging arises from ignorance, avijja, the failure to see reality as it is. At the root of ignorance lies a mistaken perception of permanence and self. We act as if our bodies, thoughts, and identities are solid and unchanging, when in truth they are processes in constant flux. Because we misperceive, we crave. Because we crave, we cling. Because we cling, we suffer. Consider the example of identity. We build a sense of me around roles: parent, worker, citizen, believer. When these roles are challenged or lost, suffering arises. If someone insults us, we cling to the idea of self that has been wounded. If success fades, we cling to the identity of being accomplished and suffer its loss. Craving is not limited to desire for pleasure. We also crave to avoid pain, to control the uncontrollable, to escape uncertainty. In trying to secure life against change, we set ourselves against the very nature of existence. This futile struggle generates endless dissatisfaction. The Buddha did not condemn desire altogether. Desire for liberation, compassion, or wholesome growth can be skillful. The problem lies in blind craving and attachment, born of ignorance. Understanding this distinction is key. Liberation does not mean indifference, but freedom from compulsive clinging. Anatta, no self, and shunyata, emptiness. Perhaps the most radical insight of the Buddha's enlightenment is the doctrine of anatta, or no self. Unlike many religious traditions that posit a permanent soul or essence, the Buddha taught that what we call the self is a composite of ever-changing processes: body, sensations, perceptions, mental formations, and consciousness. These five aggregates arise and pass moment by moment, with no unchanging core. This does not mean we do not exist at all, but that we exist as a flow, not as a fixed entity. Clinging to a permanent I is the fundamental ignorance that breeds craving and suffering. When we see through this illusion, freedom arises. Closely related is the concept of shunyata, or emptiness, emphasized in later Mahayana Buddhism. Emptiness does not mean nothingness, but the absence of inherent, independent existence. All things arise interdependently, like waves on the ocean. Nothing exists in isolation, everything is contingent. This insight has profound implications. It dissolves rigid boundaries between self and other, fostering compassion. It undermines egocentric clinging, opening space for freedom. It also aligns with modern science. Just as physics reveals matter as energy in constant flux, Buddhism reveals the self as a process without fixed essence. Realizing no self is not an abstract theory, but a lived shift in perception. When we loosen the grip on I and mine, we stop taking things so personally, we let go of rigid control, and we find peace in the flow of life. Nirvana, freedom beyond grasping. If dukkha is caused by craving and ignorance, then the cessation of dukkha is possible through the cessation of craving. This cessation is nirvana, the ultimate goal of the Buddha's path. Nirvana is often misunderstood. It is not annihilation, nor a heaven, nor a mystical trance. It is the extinguishing of the fires of greed, hatred, and delusion. The word itself means blowing out, like a flame that no longer burns because its fuel is exhausted. To experience nirvana is to awaken to a freedom beyond grasping. The mind no longer clings to experiences, identities, or outcomes. Fear and craving lose their power. There is serenity, clarity, and compassion, not because the world has changed, but because one's relationship to it has transformed. The Buddha described nirvana in paradoxical terms. It is beyond words, beyond concepts, yet present here and now. It is the highest happiness, but not in the sense of pleasure. It is peace beyond the opposites of gain and loss, birth and death. Importantly, nirvana is not reserved for the afterlife or for saints alone. The Buddha insisted it is accessible to anyone who practices the path with sincerity and persistence. It is not a gift bestowed, but a reality discovered when ignorance is dissolved. Enlightenment as a lived experience, not a belief. Perhaps the most striking feature of the Buddha's enlightenment is its emphasis on direct experience. He did not ask his followers to accept doctrines on faith. He urged them to come and see Hipasiko, to test his teachings in their own lives, like a goldsmith testing gold. Enlightenment is not believing in no self. It is perceiving it directly in the flux of experience. It is not believing in impermanence. It is seeing change moment by moment in breath, thought, and sensation. It is not believing in compassion. It is feeling the interconnection of life so vividly that compassion flows naturally. This practical, experiential orientation is why the Buddha's teaching has endured. It is adaptable across cultures because it does not depend on dogma, but on universal human experience. Whether in ancient India or modern cities, the realities of suffering, craving, impermanence, and interdependence remain the same. The path to enlightenment is therefore not about adopting a belief system, but about cultivating mindfulness, meditation, ethical conduct, and wisdom so that the truth reveals itself. Enlightenment is less a theory than a transformation, a radical shift in how we see, live, and relate to existence. 3. Enlightenment for today's world. When the Buddha first taught the Four Noble Truths, he addressed problems that were as old as humanity itself: sickness, aging, death, dissatisfaction, and the restless search for meaning. But if we look honestly at our world today, we see those same problems magnified by modern conditions. Anxiety, alienation, consumerism, ecological collapse, and the constant noise of technology define much of 21st century life. We have achieved tremendous advances in science and material comfort, yet millions still feel empty, disconnected, and lost. In such a world, the Buddha's teaching of enlightenment is not outdated philosophy, it is a practical medicine. It is not an escape from life, but a way of living awake within it. The crisis of modern life, anxiety, alienation, consumerism. Modern society has given us abundance in material terms, but scarcity and inner peace. We have endless choices, but little clarity, constant communication, but shallow connection, wealth for some, but deep inequality for many. The mental health crisis is staggering. Depression, anxiety, burnout, and suicide rates are soaring. Part of this comes from the relentless pace of life. Our minds are pulled in 1,000 directions: emails, social media, work demands, news cycles. Unlike in the Buddha's time, we are bombarded with information 24/7. Instead of using technology as a tool, many of us are used by it, enslaved by dopamine loops of likes, notifications, and endless scrolling. Another part comes from consumerism. Modern economies thrive by convincing us that happiness is one purchase away. We are sold images of the perfect body, perfect job, perfect vacation, perfect partner. But like the Buddha's teaching on dukkha, every pleasure fades, every novelty wears off, leaving the hunger for more. This endless treadmill of craving produces exhaustion, emptiness, and despair. And then there is alienation. Despite being more connected digitally, many feel profoundly alone. Communities are fragmented, families scattered, traditions weakened. The sense of belonging that once came from shared rituals, local culture, or extended kinship has eroded. Without grounding, people drift in a fog of uncertainty. These conditions are not just personal but systemic. A society built on constant consumption, competition, and comparison breeds suffering. In this context, enlightenment, the Buddha's vision of freedom from craving, ignorance, and ego, becomes not just an individual pursuit, but a potential remedy for the sickness of an entire age. How enlightenment offers psychological healing. At the personal level, enlightenment speaks directly to the mental health struggles of our time. Modern psychology increasingly confirms what the Buddha taught, that our minds generate suffering not just from external events, but from how we relate to them. Enlightenment offers healing in several key ways. Freedom from identification with thoughts. Much of modern anxiety comes from believing our thoughts are absolute truths. The Buddha taught that thoughts, like sensations, are impermanent processes. When we observe them with mindfulness, we loosen their grip. Instead of "I am anxious," we see anxiety is arising. This subtle shift creates space and reduces suffering. Understanding the nature of craving, consumer culture thrives on dissatisfaction. Enlightenment reveals that chasing desire only fuels restlessness. By seeing craving clearly, we stop expecting lasting happiness from external acquisitions. This does not mean rejecting pleasure, but enjoying it without attachment. A simple meal, a quiet walk, a loving touch become enough. The power of presence enlightenment emphasizes direct experience here and now. Depression often dwells on the past. Anxiety projects into the future. In mindful awareness, neither past nor future dominates. There is only this breath, this moment, vivid and alive. Compassion as healing. Modern loneliness can be eased by the recognition of interconnection. Enlightenment dissolves the hard boundary of self and other, opening the heart to empathy. Compassion becomes not just an ideal, but a natural response. Studies now show that compassion practices reduce stress, increase resilience, and foster well-being. In this way, enlightenment is not a mystical escape, but a deeply practical therapy for the restless modern mind. Enlightenment in relationships, ethics, and compassion. Beyond the individual, enlightenment transforms how we relate to others. The modern world is rife with conflict. Families torn by resentment, communities fractured by politics, nations divided by hatred. What would it mean to bring the clarity of enlightenment into our relationships? Ego-free relationships. Most conflicts arise from ego, the need to be right, to dominate, to protect identity. Enlightenment dissolves the illusion of a fixed self, reducing the fuel for pride and defensiveness. Relationships shift from me versus you to us in this moment. Ethics without dogma. The Buddha taught ethical conduct not as divine command, but as natural expressions of an awakened mind. Non-harming, honesty, and compassion arise not because a God demands them, but because they are conducive to peace. This model is especially relevant in a secular, pluralistic world where dogma often divides. Compassion without superstition. Enlightenment shows that compassion is not charity from on high, but recognition of shared being. We suffer together, we heal together. This removes the transactional quality of morality and replaces it with authenticity. Imagine workplaces guided by mindfulness and compassion rather than competition and burnout. Imagine politics shaped by listening rather than anger. Imagine families practicing presence instead of distraction. Enlightenment, lived in daily relationships, could reshape the very fabric of society. Enlightenment in social change, justice without anger, peace without passivity. One challenge today is how to address injustice without falling into rage or despair. Social movements often burn with righteous anger, but anger easily hardens into hatred, reproducing cycles of violence. At the same time, spiritual communities sometimes fall into passivity, preaching peace while ignoring injustice. Enlightenment offers a middle way, justice without anger, peace without passivity. When one sees clearly the roots of suffering and ignorance and craving, one responds not with hatred, but with compassion. This does not mean tolerating oppression. The Buddha himself challenged harmful practices and corrupt rulers, but his response was grounded in clarity, not vengeance. A truly enlightened approach to social change would combine fierce commitment to justice with a refusal to dehumanize opponents. It would expose exploitation while cultivating compassion even for the exploiters, understanding that they too are caught in ignorance. Such an approach is revolutionary precisely because it breaks the cycle of violence. Think of leaders like Gandhi or Martin Luther King Jr., who embodied aspects of this spirit. Their nonviolence was not weakness, but strength rooted in a vision beyond ego. That is enlightenment applied to politics and society. Enlightenment and ecology, harmony with the earth. Perhaps the greatest crisis of our century is ecological collapse. Climate change, deforestation, extinction, pollution. The earth itself groans under the weight of human craving. Here again, the Buddha's insight is profoundly relevant. Enlightenment dissolves the illusion of separateness between humans and nature. When we see that the self is empty and interdependent, we recognize that harming the earth is harming ourselves. We breathe because trees breathe. We eat because soil nourishes plants. We live because countless ecosystems sustain us. Consumer culture treats the planet as an object for exploitation. Enlightenment shifts perception. The earth is not a resource, but a living web of which we are a part. From this perspective, ecological ethics arise naturally. Simplicity becomes not sacrifice, but joy. The joy of living lightly in harmony. Many modern ecological movements are rediscovering this wisdom. Practices like deep ecology, mindfulness-based conservation, and eco-dharma all stem from the realization that spiritual awakening and environmental healing are inseparable. Enlightenment, far from being abstract, becomes a guide for survival in the age of climate crisis. The challenge: avoiding dogma and commercialism in modern Buddhism. As Buddhism spreads in the West and globally, there is a danger, turning enlightenment into another product or rigid belief system. Already, mindfulness has become a term of critique. The packaging of meditation as a corporate productivity tool, stripped of ethics and depth. This risk arises whenever profound teachings meet consumer culture. Retreats are sold like vacations, gurus become celebrities, spiritual branding floods Instagram. While some of this makes teachings accessible, it can also dilute them, reducing enlightenment to a lifestyle trend. Another risk is dogma. Even teachings meant to free us from clinging can become objects of clinging. Schools of Buddhism sometimes argue over doctrine, missing the Buddha's core message: let go of views, cling to nothing. Enlightenment cannot be institutionalized, it must be lived. To preserve authenticity, modern practitioners must return again and again to the essence: direct experience, mindfulness, compassion, and wisdom. Enlightenment is not a commodity and not a dogma. It is a way of seeing and living that cannot be bought or codified, only awakened in one's own heart. Enlightenment as a timeless solution, living awake in the 21st century. So what does it mean practically to live with enlightenment today? It means waking up from the trance of consumerism, from the illusion of separateness, from the restless chase for happiness outside ourselves. It means meeting each moment with awareness, compassion, and clarity. In personal life, it might look like pausing in the midst of stress, breathing deeply and realizing that no situation is permanent. In relationships, it might mean listening fully rather than defending ego. In work, it might mean acting ethically even when profit tempts otherwise. In activism, it might mean standing for justice without hatred. In ecology, it might mean planting trees, reducing consumption, living simply. Enlightenment is not distant or mystical. It is the invitation to live awake, to see reality as it is, to let go of craving and to act from compassion. This is as relevant in a corporate office as in a monastery, as urgent in the climate crisis as in ancient India. The Buddha's enlightenment was a discovery, not an invention. It revealed truths about the human condition that remain timeless. Everything is impermanent. The self is empty. Craving breeds suffering, and freedom is possible. These truths do not change with culture or technology. They are as true in the 21st century as they were under the Bodhi tree.